Hello everyone and welcome to another Third Age Reforged video. We have today a non-law friendly but entertaining nonetheless 3v3, and we have with us PaladinBob will be participating today, who many of you may know as a modder in his own right who supported the channel as well as Third Age native. We're going to do a quick skip over the armies before everything gets cracking and have a look and see what they've brought. Now, interestingly enough, their armies are going to be about 15k in value, give or take. And you can see here that Rohan, straight off the bat, hasn't really got that much in the way of cav, which is interesting. So I guess a good sign of the mod is that Rohan, which traditionally would have had to have never-ending amounts of cav, has been able to support themselves with seemingly a much better roster of ground foot troops. We can see here that what they've taken is a good plentiful number of axemen, followed by the Helmingers for his missile unit. We have some shield maidens, and again, for those who haven't seen them before, here you can go. You can see that they're in ambush setup, these sort of shield maidens of Rohan. Supporting them, we've got a number of spearmen holding the sort of the main line. I expect what we'll possibly see is the missile units move forward with the support of the spearmen to flee back in towards. Again, more axemen on the flank with the Marshals of the Red, who are a fantastic unit. I don't know if you guys have, again, seen these ones before. Really punishing, really great unit. High damage, good armor. And you can see there that we'll just do a quick skip over some of the cavalry that he has brought with him. So we've got the Royal Guard, which are pretty much unstoppable, followed by some Royal Lords. We have one catapult and then another Royal Guard unit on the flanks. Moving over to have a look at the allies, what we'll do is quickly have a look as we start moving forward. They're just going to reposition themselves, so you may see them teleport around slightly as we do this. But you can see that we've got an army by rules which we don't ever get to see very often, which is the Free Peoples of Eredor, which again, I suspect I've probably pronounced that incorrectly. But you don't often see these guys being involved very often, but we have got some Knights of Anumus who are fantastic. If any of you have ever seen the Battle for Anuminus, which was, for me personally, quite a grueling scenario to get right and to, I suppose, get balanced. It's kind of the bane of the riders of Reforged for how many times we had to play that scenario. He's got some Dunedain battle ready, which are a really great unit. Definitely going to make up the bulk of his kills, I would have thought. Followed by some Royal Guard here, which you can see there with the really nice sort of circular shields and the fur. Almost sort of remind me of a bit of a cross between the Dunlenders and maybe a bit of the Ruadur Vikings. Pushed up to the front, we've got the catapult, which is being sort of repositioned, as we can see, followed by a number of footmen and gatekeepers. Again, for those that may not have been able to see gatekeepers before, they're a crossbow missile unit with these sort of fantastic sort of axes, sort of these glaives, I suppose, really is a better term for them, on their backs. And there you go, you can see that they've got some standard footmen to hold the line along the way. Now, the interesting thing about the Free Peoples of Eredor, so I think traditionally they're not played very often because their breadth of sort of units that they have in their roster is perhaps slightly more limited than some of the others. And to be honest, also their better units appear a lot in the Arnor sort of faction list, and therefore a lot of people don't bother taking them too much. The good thing about the Three Peoples of Eredor, though, as much as they have hobbits, which I think is funny, they also have great units for the price and the value. What I would say is if you're ever looking for a battle which is sort of a mid or lower value, definitely have a look at the Free Peoples. You can make quite a strong force without that much cost. Just going to check to see if we've missed anyone. So we've got a Royal Guard over here. You can see them. Again, I think I pointed them out before, but we'll just zoom in. I do like the shield designs. I do like the fact that they're slightly different for each of them. Again, a little bit of the cav. We've got some bodyguard at the back, and another Knights of Anuminus. So I suspect that this is going to be quite strong to deal with. It'd be interesting to see how much cav the opposing forces take. And lastly, we've got Rune, which, interestingly enough, is not being played by rules this time, which is Always fun to see, as previously we've had quite a few with rules playing as Rune. And here we go, we've got some Brotherhood of the Lance. If people haven't seen the Brotherhood units, of which there's a couple, I really like the way the armors turned out. I think they look really sort of fantastic. And if you ever get a chance to play as Rune, take some Brotherhood, even if it's Brotherhood of the Axe, because they just look the part, like visually speaking. But then again, Rune has looked the part all over because of the gold armor you can see here. So he's got some heavy infantry put up by some clan crossbowmen. Sort of good collection of spearmen here. He's definitely filled himself with a large number of spearmen. He's got a catapult, more never-ending line of spearmen with some heavy infantry on the flanks, some wind riders. People who've maybe seen these videos before, these guys are fast. When you see them running, you'll think that they're going at double speed, and pretty much because compared to everything else, they are. We also have some tribesmen at the back for his Javies. And we've got some Dragon's Wrath. We've got a couple of I want to call them the Viragi, but I think that's probably going to be incorrect. And you can see them there. They're there with what looks to be sort of splint armor and a wonderful helmet there. I really like the plumage that they get on the mounts. I'm just going to pause it now because the deployment phase is finished and I don't want to miss the other side. And again, you can see here that we've got more of the Dragon Wraths guildsmen. Okay, so going over to their competitors then, who they're up against, we've got Harad, who are going to go up against Rune, so it'll be interesting to see how that battle goes, especially since Harad generally lack in sort of, in my opinion at least, cavalry units. As much as they do have the sort of Serpent Guard, besides that I think that they can sometimes struggle. You can see here that he's taken some Sevron Lancers. I think they're really just going to be a sort of show of force. They're not the best cavalry in the world, but maybe if he can get a good charge on the crossbows, then he can make the most of that. He's got some Royal Archers, which are fantastic. Oh, you can see he's actually put up some spikes, so they may come very useful to protect his archers. The Royal Archers, really fantastic unit. Great armor, great in melee as well as range. He's got some pikemen just to fill up the sort of, I think, his arrow fodder, or in this case, it'll be crossbow fodder. Large number of footmen. Again, quite good for the price. They are a spearman unit. They're comparable to, say, Gondor spearmen. They're slightly cheaper, but in the same sense, a Gondor spearman would win. So a ballista that they've brought for their artillery unit. So I think we'll see some catapult snipes. We've got some Royal Guard spearmen at the back. And this is with the Abnazim Naruzgaga. I'm going to really butcher this, but these guys are a two-handed unit, heavy armored, sort of armor-piercing troop, really good at cutting through. They're going to have some tribesmen as their Jav unit. I really like the tribesmen. I think that actually, in a lot of games, I think that Javs don't get as much love as some of the other units, and I really think that Javelins can really make or break, especially as you see more and more armies having such high armor class and armor value on very expensive units. A really great opportunity to make the most of using Jav. And the other thing about the tribesmen that I like is that they've got a relatively good number. I mean, 123 units, and they're not that bad in melee if you have to throw them in. Shari Shadows here, another great missile unit, and I think actually these guys will be probably very good at taking on the crossbows that they're going to be up against. They'll have a good rate of fire, good damage, and since they didn't have the thickest armor anyway, going up against crossbows won't matter so much. And I think that the damage and pace that these guys will put out will be quite a good matchup for the clan crossbowmen. Again, more footmen, which seems to be the bulk of the army. He's got another heavily armored archer unit. I think what we will see, and I suspect what will happen, is that if Harad notices the large number of crossbow units here, I think Bacon, who's controlling him, should swap them out and maybe move the Sharis forward and take out his more expensive archers back, because the crossbows will do relatively well against them in terms of their armor piercing. Moving on now to Donald, who's playing as Isengard. We've got a number of the Wardens of Dunland, which are, again, quite Viking-like. They don't have as fancy of a shield, but they do look pretty good. I do like the sort of Saxon style, sort of known tip helm. It's always funny seeing them with the flag bearer of an orc. But here we go. We've got some Uruk-hai archers. They're matching up against the Free Peoples, so it'd be interesting to see if the archers of the Uruk-hai will have enough damage to break through, especially since they're going to have the battle-ready Dunedain. I think they're going to hopefully have some Isengard crossbows. We got some Dunlander veterans. It's good to see the Dunland getting some love there. The first peoples before Rohan kicked them out. Although I think it would have been fun to see them matched up against Rohan on the far flank, but it appears that they aren't going to get that opportunity to take their revenge just yet. We have some Uruk-hai infantry, which are pretty staple. I mean, they're very good. They can form shield wall. They're a good pushing unit. Uruk-hai bodyguard. And in sort of the main central box here, we've got Uruk-hai infantry again. A catapult unit. Here's the crossbows. So we do have some Uruk-hai crossbows, which is great. Pikeman, which is a staple. Although, interestingly enough, he hasn't seemingly taken as many pikemen as you sometimes see in Isengard forces, maybe because he was concerned because of the open plain and the nature of the battlefield, that actually the pikes couldn't get into a position where they wouldn't be flanked, so maybe he preferred to have the more versatile swords units. We got some Nazak High, which are great. They're a really good unit. He's got to be careful about cav charges against them, but they're so strong. And it looks like there you go. This is General's unit. I'm not too surprised by that. It's a really great unit. And especially since Rohan didn't take that many in the way of cav, I think that was a really good choice in terms of that. Got some berserkers, really good to get into the fray. I think that'd be a nice matchup for the Free Peoples if they head that way. Although actually, I'd be probably tempted to maybe support Harad with these guys to help puncture through some of the heavy armor of the spearman units he's got over there. More pikemen at the rear, and he's got some of the trolls of the White Hand, which I always quite like the hand on the shoulder and on the helm. Interesting enough that the Uruk-hai bodyguard aren't actually being the bodyguard, so the army of sort of can't believe they're not Lurts. We also have some Warg Riders from Donald, which is good to see. I think that there'd be a nice, because they don't have a huge amount of cavalry. I think having the Warg Riders, 2 units here, one of them being the champions of the White Hand, is good. I think they'll help lock down those smaller units of cav and don't let them run around them. I think that'll be a nice counter. And it looks like, for comparable sake, he's got a reasonable number to be able to take on the opponents. And lastly, we have PaladinBob playing as the Owls. He's got a catapult. At the back, he's got the Forest Wardens, which are sort of light armor. I think he's probably going to use them possibly as some fodder. Maybe he's held them quite far back, so maybe he wants to see how the lay of the land works before he gets sort of stuck in with them or commits them anywhere. Good number of spearmen, number of units there, and he's moved forward. His missile units, all with stakes in front of them. Again, I suspect because he was up against Rohan, he certainly feared the high cav numbers, and hence why I think we've seen so many spearmen and so many spikes, because he probably thought that he was going to get a lot of cav come against him. He has, however, brought his own pathfinders, great charge bonus, and it looks like he's got some of the missile cav as well. It'll be interesting to see if these guys can really make the most of their position. I think we can get some good charges from there. I especially think that they'll probably look to try and go for the Axemen, try and take them out early, since although Rohan does have some spears, I think there's an opportunity there. Right, we're going to let this battle get underway and commence, and we'll see how we do. As you can see them lined up over in the distance. Quite a defensive position by PaladinBob, so we'll be interested to see if he pushes out from there. But it does look like the most early movement is going to come over here from Isengard, so we'll just move over there. Now, it could just be he's repositioned his forces, but he is running his bodyguard, leaving this gap open, and it does feel like Rules may be trying to come into here. He might try and maybe block off the opposing enemy. I think we'll probably see a long skirmish phase to begin with, but it looks like Isengard's quite happy with this sort of hill position as we start to see the Knights of Annuminus begin their charge, possibly to clear out the wargs, or what it looks like PaladinBob is actually on the move. So PaladinBob isn't going to take a defensive position as much as he positioned himself over here, possibly because he's seen that there isn't much in the way of Rohan cavalry, and you can see that Rules has seen the repositioning. We're going to have the Warg Riders come in to try and slow down that advance. Rules is going to break off his charge, possibly try and taunt some of the wargs away to follow that unit as he repositioned himself to try and get a charge off. And you can see that the Knights of Annuminus hit into the side of the wargs, which again have been missed now as the bodyguards come in, going for the spearman unit at the back, which aren't formed up, probably hitting, mainly probably trying to get the missile unit, starting to get some early kills. You can see them whittle them down as the spearman repositions, so he's going to want to get those forces out of there. And the other walker unit has locked down the other two forces. They're going to have to try and think about spreading them. Now, it is a 2v3 in terms of numbers as Rohan sends over its bodyguard to try and support. Again, I think what's probably going to happen is Rohan might consider trying to lock down the cav while the Free Peoples go for the easier targets, but it doesn't look like it's going to work that way. It looks like they're going to try and team up now on the walks, try and remove them entirely as Bob tries to bring over his cav, and you can see he's actually setting up his catapult, I think, to try and see if he can get a shot on some very expensive cav units here, which are in a big long row. It does look like from that engagement that the wargs are coming off the worst of it, and I don't blame them. They were outnumbered against a very superior force. Although they are good at taking out cav, this is probably, I said, the Knights of Annuminus is probably, in my opinion, one of the best units in cavalry in the game for its price. And you can see that they're starting to reposition themselves as Rohan has charged up very quickly. Actually, I'm quite impressed to see how quick Rohan was able to reposition themselves to try and take the most of this combat here, while PaladinBob's elves try and join its ally. And you can see he's setting himself up here, probably to L-shape off this location and try and bring over as many of his forces as he can as he begins the assault. He is losing a fair few number of his Pathfinders as it's now 3 units sort of locked in, and you can see here that Rules has been able to hunt down that catapult, which was, I think, like I said, looking for a shot before, but it possibly has meant that Bob's lost that. We have got a small engagement. I'm just going to zip over to see what we've got in the far corner. Again, it's mainly a cavalry engagement. It's Rune taking out Harad. I don't think that's going to last very long. Harad's Serpent Bodyguard aren't going to, I think, withstand the superior, in my opinion, Rune Cav, but he has held his own relatively well. I don't think he's lost as many as he could have done. It looks like the Spear Lance unit of Harad, probably the Southron Spear Lancers, took the brunt of it, and the Ballista's been pulled back, so it looks like they did try and push it up for a snipe. I'm going to head back over to where the main action is, which was over here, where you can see still PaladinBob trying to get his forces up on this hill. You can see they're still relatively spread, still trying to get over. Now, it's interesting to see that Rules hasn't brought over his main force yet. He's still trying to do everything he can with his cavalry units that he's got, his 3 cav units, but he has at least had Rohan come up to support him on that flank, which is really going to give that sort of melee support that he needs. As you can see here, the spearman that did stay behind to try and help I suppose as a rear guard, is going to get mopped up there and swallowed up by a larger force. And it's quite lucky, I think, that the catapult was taken out, because that would be quite juicy of a target otherwise. And still you see that they have a cavalry trying to make short work, trying to remove the Pathfinders off of the field. If they can get cav supremacy, that will put them in real good hands. And there you go, there's the catapult crew who are doing a run for it. It's possibly that they may see about trying to get back to it later, but I don't think they're going to get back to that catapult anytime soon. Spearmen again trying to form up, trying to take on, and you can see that actually Isengard has sent over the trolls to try and help the fleeing elves get up onto the hillside, and there's the Pathfinders down to 18, down to 16 now. Royal Guard still working around in the back zones, really going for these missile units, really trying to punch holes in a disorganized defense. It's interesting to see that PaladinBob did try and do this rush to make this locked off L shape. I guess they quite liked the idea of this hillside, and they thought it would be a useful place to position themselves, but I think that long charge over to get to this sort of defensive spot has caused a problem. And a rather aggressive Rohan has lost their general really early on in the battle, extremely quickly. So he's been quite aggressive, and actually it looked like a matchup that he probably 9 times out of 10 anyone else would have been happy to take, as he went up against missile units followed by some bodyguard. It does feel like it's just unfortunate as the unit of 25 Royal Lords breaking. That hopefully we'd like to see them come back to the battlefield, but it looks like that was just really just unlucky there by Rohan, as the trolls continue to try and fight against the bodyguard army there of Rules, which are in turn trying to finish off the last of the artillery. They really don't want them to get back to that catapult, it would seem. Knights of Annuminus still okay, about half numbers there on 13, and the Royal Guard still healthy on 50. But they are looking like they might get a charge, but it looks like the Pathfinders have changed their minds as they are only 9, and that's a unit of 50. I suspect what will happen now is Rohan will try and save those forces now he's lost his general, take a moment to stop his units from wavering, and then reposition them. As you can see, the trolls now moving forward to try and take on the Royal Lords of 23. A little bit exposed there by themselves, without any support, but I think they've probably got enough health to survive that. As we start seeing this die down, we see the lines reform. I'm going to move over and see how Harad and Rune are doing one another, because this looks like it's a bit more scrappy and a bit more in your face. As you can see here, the spearmen must have moved up to try and support their cav. However, they're changing their mind now as the blisters targeting catapults. It's now taken out all of the catapults, so hopefully Rune was able to get some good shots, but I'm looking over and I can't really see any large shots from a catapult that seems to make me think that they connected relatively well. Serpent Guard protecting the ballista here as Rune seems to take the more difficult end off the back of that engagement. You can see large scores of cavalry dead, but again, remember that a lot of these were the Savron Lancers, which are not particularly that good, but we do have the 25 Wind Riders still healthy, and we've got 15 of his Cataracts, I think they're pronounced, but I'm not going to say that I'm an expert on pronunciation. And the Ballista now is free reign, really, to start engaging. So as much as the elves were struggling on the far side, it does look like Harad is doing pretty well on this side. And his positioning is pretty good as they are being harassed by the Knights of Illuminus, but they are falling quite heavily. But they did look like they probably got quite a good charge off with one of their Knights of Illuminus into the side here. Of the rather expensive archer unit, so we'll just see if it's worth it as another charge comes in from the Brotherhood of the Lance. You can see them starting to take some pretty heavy hits here, but again, they're still pretty healthy. 62, supported by the Shari Shadows, and the pikemen now are repositioning, but actually these guys don't have the most damage in the world. They will have a bonus against cav, but they're not the biggest threat ever. The Wardens of Dunland are actually going to move over, it seems, to support their ally. Again, I think they're doing okay here. If anything, I think what we should probably start seeing is maybe Rune considering about moving up his infantry. He's going to keep getting peppered down otherwise by this ballista. Now, admittedly, it's not like he's short of spearmen, and he has stretched them out relatively wide, so the impact is probably maybe 1 or 2 soldiers each time. And the crossbow are in range to make shots. It feels like they're probably heading over here against these Serpent Guard, which are just kind of standing out by themselves. I think they've been locked in slightly with the Cav unit, which is, I think, the sacrificial lamb to finish off the last of Harad's Cav off of the field. So it's a 5v17, but I think that's where the crossbows are going to train themselves. It does feel like things have slowed down over here as they've positioned themselves up on the hill. You can see that L shape that I was talking about before has now been able to be formed. I think we'll probably see it a little bit slower now as Rohan probably start repositioning themselves, and as you can see here, Rules is moving up his forces as well. So from a very sort of explosive start, we're going to start seeing a much more concerted effort into a skirmish phase, and the artillery is being brought forward. The Dunland clansmen coming up rather aggressively here, followed by some Urukai infantry. I guess that they fancy their chances at going up against the footmen, and I don't blame him. Rules has instead taken and moved up his battle buddy Dunedain, which should cut through these guys like a warm knife through butter. I think that the footmen themselves probably aren't the greatest unit in the world, as you can see the catapult coming in, already blown up one of Rules's with a really lucky shot, and you can see the return fire from the fiery balls of death, but not really hitting their mark in the way they'd hoped. But again, as I was saying before, these footmen aren't the most threatening unit in the world, and I can see why he was pushing up his infantry to try and clear these guys out. I think these gatekeepers are going to probably fall to the Trolls of the White Hand. He might want to consider having his spearmen push in just to give them a hand, or at least fall these guys back. As you can see, another shot coming in from the catapult, hitting its mark. Again, they've been quite lucky, I think, Donald, in terms of his shots. Given enough time, I think we'll see these guys fall, and you can see another 3 being whittled down. He has to be slightly careful with Dunedain. If they decide to change their target, which they might do, nope. This could be a good target for the catapult. Again, relatively cheap units against extremely expensive ones. Rules has spent most of his money on his cavalry and those battle readies. So if you can get rid of a few of them, you can see them starting to hit the mark on the spread out units here for the crossbows, which have opened fire. Rohan being more aggressive on this side, so if Isengard are the aggressors in the centre, Rohan pushing forward will go, getting caught out a little bit with his spearmen and a bit of a blob as the crossbow shots come in. But he is engaging now his axeman against the spear unit, so that'll be a good matchup, and he's going to get a flank on. And again, it looks like Rohan's going to get a very large flank. I expect the spearmen will have to form up now, but if he's not lucky, these cav around here are going to find some nice juicy targets to hit. Possibly the berserkers might be tempting, but there's a gap here to try and get in for these crossbows. As you can see here that Harad is now also doing a similar thing. He is starting to move units. I think we'll probably see him lock off this section here and then maybe do an ordered retreat. I think if I was tempted by, as Rune, I'd be worried that he is starting to move units over, and actually this could be the beginnings of a sort of controlled retreat or exodus, and maybe moving his forces up would make more sense at this point. As he starts to reform them actually into shield wall, I think, from the looks of it, realizing there's not much threat from melee. But I think at this point, he has to start moving forward. He has to consider the fact that his allies are doing that. His allies right now, you could argue, are doing a 3 for 2, because with Rune not pushing up to support, Harad has got free game now to just change the direction of his archers and move over his supporting corsairs, who we didn't see it before, probably because they're in ambush positioning. But these are a cheap unit, they're a good arrow fodder, and he's using them effectively to get some flanking on bandits of all things, which again I think must have been also hidden. Now bandits have a good number of forces in their squad, but I think the corsairs will cut through them with the support of the heavy infantry. I really think, you can see now, actually, now that we mention it, Rune is starting to move up his first sort of forces. I think it's possibly slightly late and a bit too small of a force. I think if he's going to do it, he's going to have to do it quicker. And having said that, the Brotherhood of the Lance, again, another aggressive general charge. I think he's here. Sorry, no, he's not. Where was he? Is that him there? So it looks like, apologies, I can't find where he is, but it looks like Rune was charging forward and also the general. And there's another general drop gone. That looks like the Three People's general. So for those watching, because it's all a bit quick, the generals of Rohan, Rune, and the Three Peoples of Eredor, all on the same side, seem to have all died. Seemingly all being calves, seemingly all being in the thick of the melee, have fallen. It's possible the bloodlust had overtaken them from being able to kill so many elves at the very beginning. But you can see now Rune is starting to engage with his full force, really make the most of the fact that he's there. Again, I think he can probably have no problem punching through these pikemen if he tries. And these corsairs I don't think would stop his spearmen either. I think he's got the superior infantry and he should be making the most of that. And you can even see he's got some shadow guard who are coming in on the flank. And I'd be tempted to not reposition them and actually go head first forward into these trollmen, see if he can wipe them out. I love trollmen, but I really think that the Shadow Guard would probably be a good matchup for them to clear them out. But from Harad's point of view, that's the best unit he's probably got to combat them, except for his two-handers, and that might be his general's unit, which is probably why he's leaving them in reserve. As you can see, the Corsairs again using brute force and numbers to try and hold them back here on the flank. These tribesmen probably should consider. Right, okay, another general's fallen. This time it's looks to be Isengard's general, I think, from the looks of that clip. Apologies if it's wrong, but that's how it appeared to be to me. So we are seeing generals drop left, right, and centre. So whoever wins this battle, I think everyone loses anyway. And the catapult continues to fire now, trying to get the larger blobs of the Free Peoples, who have continued to push back. So you can see this is where the battle line for a lot of the fighting actually is. But you can see that the gatekeepers have moved forward with their crossbows to take on the Isengard, and you can see some routing infantry there who are falling back from the footmen. So we'll see if these ever return. It'd be quite far back in the battle lines if they do, and bandits again being brought up. It does look like the Free People are down to one catapult. It looks like another one had been hit from a lucky shot. Isengard definitely making the most of the sort of RNG. As you can see here, he still has all three of his firing. Rohan's bit of a slog and a bloodfest getting through the elves. Tough battle for them to really punch her through, but it does look like they're starting to slowly be able to do so as the dismounted Royal Guard spearmen start moving on to take on the pikemen Seem to be doing relatively well actually with the shield maidens here. Be interested to see if these shieldmen still have any axes as they. Oh, there you go. There you see them throwing the axe. They're throwing them. What are they aiming for? Nope, they've changed their mind. Whatever it was they were firing at. I think they were firing at the Nazak High, which are running around now. Oh no, they still have Saruman, so they're going to take on force the bandits. They'll sweep through them. It won't take them long at all. I think we'll see these guys break before they die as the archers continue to fire, and that was a bit of a burny smell. Yep, there you go. The bandit's taking a big hit there. Is any of them Nazakai? No, it looks entirely to be bandits. That's really unlucky. Not even, I think, one Nazakai died from that. As you can see, that the Royal Guard continuing to try and work their magic, try and shut down this catapult. It has got some archers to help support it, but just going to keep trying to stop it from being able to fire, keep disrupting that crew. It's the pikemen reformed to face up against sort of depleted axe units that seem to be going around, and the shield maidens are coming in. Looks like they're going to get a rear charge on the spearmen who haven't formed themselves up facing in the right direction. So the shield maidens are going to get nice in and start kind of cutting up as the dismounted Royal Guard reposition, probably chasing those pikemen, and will get reformed. I think Rohan has been making a really good push here, considering he's been taking on elves and Isengard at once and struggling uphill. Catapult continuing to fire, heading for the Uruk-hai bodyguard, possibly because he thinks that's where the general is as opposed to in the Nazak-hai force. And you can see that Harad have moved themselves slightly forward to take on the threat of Rune, but I think this is going to be sort of a bit of a sideshow, really. I think ultimately whoever wins here will probably take the day. You can see that the veterans from Isengard have been brought over to help support, really just kind of keep that flank locked down, as the Ishari Shadows have now been brought in, I think possibly because they've been out of ammunition, and they're going to go up against the Dragon Wrath Guildsmen, which would be quite a good matchup, especially with the support of the Corsairs as just kind of a little bit of fodder. But I think that probably the Dragon Wrath just a slightly stronger unit. I think they'll probably hold on there and do relatively well unless they for some reason should lose too many from a skirmish. The tribesmen here supporting their frontline troops as the Elven general now falls. So again, more generals. I think that's the fifth of six generals now who have fallen. Look at all the dead Javis. I wonder what took them out. Anyway, regardless, they've gone for the right target. I think this is a fantastic target for Javs. Nice close, good arc. The spearmen should hopefully hold for a little bit longer. I mean, I know there's only 6 of them, but if they can really get some nice Jav shots in there, that will really help save some lives further on. As the crossbows now push forward to start hitting those heavier sort of armoured targets. Looks like the ballista crew are caught in combat somewhere. Now, it's either that they've run out of ammunition or they've accidentally been knocked out of it from melee, but I think possibly from looking at the way they're being repositioned, I think they're out of ammunition. As Dragon Wrath have taken out this sort of centre, and they are going to reform, probably sweep in, do some rear charges on these Corsair Blackguards. And you can see there the Trollmen seemingly taking on some tribesmen. Now, again, not a bad thing. I think the Trollmen will win, but actually what he's doing is the Trollmen are being locked in against a relatively cheap unit that's probably out of ammunition, and the armor-piercing strength that the Trollmen have isn't coming into play as well against this force. Again, they're a really variable unit, very good at taking out elite forces, but they're just being slowed down by a rather cheap unit, which gives enough time for Rune to come over with stronger ones as these guys get tired out. And, you know, every one that the tribesmen kill is another one that can't kill something more important later. And you can see here that he's now had to commit his Nazararvim, again, not pronouncing that correctly, missile unit, which is finishing off the last of 2 Trollmen before they'll turn around and face that. And I think that, in my opinion, that the heavy infantry, although a good matchup, should probably win. They're still healthy. I mean, 62 against 37, so I fancy their chances. 3 people now really sort of mixing up the back lines now. They're getting stuck in, moving around. Helminga's from Rohan coming in. So this area, which I think they want to lock off, has now sort of become a wide open door. And you can see that was the silence catapult there. Now, what's happened here is that these guys on the hill have fallen back slightly because they've been pushed back from the Free Peoples and Rohan. But what's happened is that Harad hasn't been able to withdraw alongside them. So you can see that although they still have battle lines up here and they are still trying to hold, they can't support this open rear flank now. And with Harad with so many forces dead, are now going to get mopped up with rear charges from the free people who can lock down the battle line here and finish off these guys. And once that happens, they'll move everybody over and take on the final last stand. I think if I was Rune, I'd probably consider stopping those catapults there as they start hitting the spearmen allies in the back. And the gatekeeper's now going to let loose with crossbows into the rear of their opponents. I think looking, however, at Harad, they're kind of short on forces now, and the ones they do have are starting to break. Trollmen, again, still fighting valiantly on, but I think the tribesmen probably have them at this point. So what we're going to do is we're probably going to leave this battle now, as I can't imagine that there's much happening there. Just mopping up. I'm going to head back over to where the Elves and Isengard are as they sort of make their final stand. And you can see them here going up against some bandits with some bodyguard, but they are getting surrounded by the Marshal's Red. So again, look at these guys. Look at that sort of almost Varangian Guard-like axe that they're wielding. Quite brutally as well. Look at the spin. I don't know if you guys saw that on the live stream, but they'll spin round with a very deep cut, and they're mixed in with the Shield Maidens, going toe-to-toe with Orcs, showing what they can do, while the Uruk-hai start to waver. I think that this is probably a battle where we know what the outcome's going to be at this point, but look at the Rithers of Dead, really. It's a brutal fight here. You can see pockets of engagements. You can see each time they had to withdraw where each of the sort of break points were, where they tried to make lines. But this is what really hurt them, I think, at the start. And we'll come back to view that once we get closer to the end, although there isn't much remaining. Again, you can see the pockets of forces and fighting that took place. Really what happened was the Elves tried to join themselves, join their ally of Isengard on the hill, try and make a defensive position. I thought actually the Elves had quite a good defensive position. Now, the reason they may have moved themselves, and there goes the final general. I think the reason they maybe tried to move themselves is they were heavy in spearmen, I expect because they thought that Rohan would have a lot of cav, but actually Rohan didn't have the most cav in the world. However, the cav they did have, backed up with the Knights of Innuminus, tore them out as they were starting to move along, and losing that catapult early was quite difficult. And more so than the kills, because actually if you look at the battlefield, the biggest problem really, I suppose, from the kills here is that the Wargs and the Pathfinders both died, which gave cav supremacy to Rohan and the Free Peoples, but more than that, it was disrupted lines. So the Spearmen never really got an opportunity to reform. The Archers never really got into position where they could make the most of the hill and their positioning. And once the Cav was gone, the enemy Cav, as much as they were quite, I suppose, aggressive in their style, losing their generals, they were able to make the most of these rear charges. You can actually see where they were buckling, where these charges were coming in, because you can see the dead cavalry where they were really making the most of these rear positions and these sort of more squishy units that they could remove from the battlefield. And again, partly because of that, when Free Peoples then started to push up more aggressively through the center, there was probably so much controls that the guys on this hill had to do in terms of units they had to move or positioning or orders they had to make. They literally didn't have enough hands to move all their units in the positions they wanted to, because every time I suspect they were lining themselves up and getting ready to take on a force here, they were getting charged repeatedly here, and each time they reformed here, I suspect the cav was moving and hitting a different target and just completely keeping them on the back foot, making the most of the disruption. And there we go. We come to the end of it now in terms of the replay. You can see here that the Elves, yeah, they really just couldn't get themselves going. Elves generally, you know, most people would be pretty happy to have an Elven unit, an army. As much as their value means that you can't take very many. You can see here, smallest army present. Generally, they make up for that number in terms of their quality. And with somebody like PaladinBob, who's more than a veteran at this game and certainly better than myself, you generally think that was a pretty safe bet. Looking at the allies, though, you can see that Isengard really, you know, did well for himself. And so did his ally, actually. I mean, credit where credit's due. I mean, these guys both took out what is the equivalent of an army by themselves when you look at the comparison. If you think that Bacon was up against, say, with Harad against Rune, he basically took out the equivalent of an army. And again with Donald, if you think of him sort of, he was up against the Free Peoples, again almost an army, but just couldn't get these guys working the way they wanted. And again, the quality of the guys that these guys still had left was a bit too much for them, I think. You can see here that kills, so Rune, as much as we didn't see them breaking the line, making the most gameplay, did get the most kills. You can see here that the Free Peoples getting healthy numbers, as did Rohan. But I think more than just what the kills are trying to tell us, I think it was more about how they did it. You can see they all have very sort of similar sort of armies left over, but it was what they did. It was the tactics they did as opposed to the kills that they got. Have a quick glance now. So this was submitted by the Rohan player, so K of D North, so thank you very much for that. And we can see here, looking through the numbers, his Royal Guard, 363 kills, punishing the opponents. The Royal Lords, these are the ones we saw breaking, I think, which really struggled and lost the general very early, unfortunately, with I think a unit of 25 still, so they're quite difficult to get going. Shield Maidens really showing themselves, one of them getting close to 100. And the Marshal of the Red, yeah, so a unit of 50, is that 55 casualties? Yeah, so they did well for themselves. You can see here, 194. I really do like this unit. It's really good. Definitely worth its money if you can make it work as a really aggressive, fantastic melee sort of infantry. The rest of the forces, pretty much as you'd expect. I mean, nothing special knocking around. The Axemen, I guess they struggled a little bit against maybe the pikes that they were up against and some of the elven spears, but what was important is they locked those down to help make it so that the cav, which we saw near the top, really make the most of it. And the Helmingers, actually, I mean, they got more kills than I thought they would be, mainly because they were pushing forward so quickly, constantly with their infantry. I wasn't sure how much they could really set up their archery and their skirmish phase, but they did well for themselves, sort of, close to 80 or above. I'm going to leave that there for everybody. I'd like to thank everyone for watching. Please feel free to continue to submit videos to ourselves that you find exciting and interesting, and the closer the better. Information and description below will have everything you need. We want to thank everybody who helped support us as a community. We couldn't do any of this without you. We appreciate all of your support. So thank you very much. And until next time, have a good time, everybody.